I'm Sonia Lennon.
I'm Brendan Courtney, and you're listening to Lennon Courtney Left Alone, a podcast about conversations we have when we're left alone.
For this series, we ain't alone no more. Each week, we'll be joined by a special guest who'll share their insights on equality, diversity, inclusion, and lots more beside.
This week, we're joined by Clíona O'Leary, Deputy Head of RTE TV Sport. In this issue, Clíona talked to us about equality and social justice, particularly in the area of women's sport, and the positive contribution public service broadcasting can make in these areas.
But wait, before you do anything, please leave us a 5-star rating and a beautiful positive review wherever you listen. It only takes seconds, but it really helps us to grow.
We've a lot to get through, so let's get started.
This is Lennon Courtney Left Alone with guest Clíona O'Leary.
Clíona O'Leary, Deputy Head of RTE TV Sport. You're very welcome to our podcast, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. Full disclosure, we have met. I do know you, obviously, and not obviously, but because I have nothing to do with sport. But we met on our course, on our EDI Masters course. So you're very welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Clíona, you spoke to our class during our Masters in Business, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, and I think you really opened our eyes. Sport is such a huge part of our national identity. I think even maybe more so because the national sport is such a big part of who we are and sort of the regional glue of Ireland. But, you know, it's such a microcosm of what's happening in society around particularly gender equality. Tell us about your role in that.
So, yeah, it is, and I agree. And I've been involved in sport. I suppose I have a passion for sport, and that's kind of led me in everything that I've done, from participation to my career. And I've worked for 24 years now in RT Sport. Yeah, even I suppose I did gender studies in college back in 93. So I had always an interest in equality. But then I went into the sports department, and I felt so privileged to be there and to be accepted in such a male kind of dominated world that I just totally, I suppose, accepted everything for the way that it was. And it wasn't until 2013 that a woman, Sharon Hutchinson, from the Audience Council in RTE, she challenged me really on, you know, why we were making the choices we were. Why was it that, you know, we didn't have as much women's sports coverage as like she had wanted? And, you know, she asked me to speak at a media event down in Ballybunion at the time. And when I was writing it up, I recognized that I was, like, you know, to my horror, I suppose, I was questioning women. You know, I was questioning women's sport and the validity of it, you know, in terms of audience engagement. And it really opened up my eyes to the fact that I had this unconscious bias that was kind of giving me, I suppose, a lens on the world of sport that wasn't fair or equal, and was completely contrary to the person and the beliefs that I felt that I held. So that was back in 2013. And at the time, I just said, you know, it horrified me that I was so blind really to the world around me. And I just made a promise to myself that I would start to point it out and try and make small changes where I could. And that kind of led me, I suppose, on a journey then of following up on that and pursuing it and finding like-minded people as well within the world of media. And, you know, his 2020 campaign then kind of changed everything. And it gave me the opportunity, I suppose, to really pursue it more strongly with the support of the DG, who said that we would be 20% by 2020 in terms of media coverage, which was a massive statement considering worldwide it is 4% women's sport. You know, that's the UNESCO figure from 2018.
So just to take you back a step before we go into the amazing strides you've made, the awareness piece is a really massive piece. And when you talked at our class, and I suppose it's really important that we point out to people who are listening that these conversations are around equality, diversity and inclusion. That's why Dr. Helen Diden was on last week, and while you were talking about sport specifically. And these are just conversations we have with guests about their experience of it. And it really struck me how open and honest you were in the role that you have in quite an important role in sport in Ireland representation, that you speak very frankly about that awareness piece and how you were blind to that as well. And you seem to own that very well. You really look back at that as kind of a moment that changed you, do you think, in terms of your professional career?
Oh, it absolutely did. And, you know, it is quite challenging to actually question everything around you. And you can, like, I suppose it helped me. And over the years, I mean, that's back in 2013. It's been one of the defining, I suppose, parts of what I'm about, and it's given me a massive purpose within sport to pursue it, because I feel so strongly and passionately about it. The area of representation, probably in particular, that, like, really we always had male pundits, experts talking about sport, and, like, actually recognizing that, I never, like, I've always had this kind of imposter syndrome around sport as well, and the feeling that, my opinion on sport maybe wasn't hugely valued. And a lot of that was a lack of confidence in there. But when I started to question that further, I recognized that, well, actually, a lot of the role models we have and a lot of the people that we put on air, well, they're all men talking about sports. So no wonder it is the case that you would question that. We put men in there, and I suppose sport is it was designed by men for men, and so it is a constant push to try and change the way that it's seen by people. But having now, and I suppose that was one of the big parts of what we did, RT Sport did in 2019, was to create its very first women in sports strategy and set a measurement system and set targets for ourselves, to change, like, what content we were covering, but also change, our representation. And say before that, like, it's 2016, 2017, we were probably talking maybe 4% of our experts talking about sport were women. And, in 2020, 26% of our experts on TV were women. That's a massive move. And for radio, it was 19%. So that's a huge shift. And it's thanks to targets being set that we delivered on that. And I think that, the feedback we have received has been overwhelmingly positive around that as well.
I think what I love about your story is that it is so relatable. Certainly, myself and Brandon have had loads of moments during our EDI journey, if you like, where we've gone, like, how could we not have seen that? And I think it's the fact that we do live in a very unequal world. But I love that you say that you have, you're a very bright, well-educated woman with a very strong set of core values and a sort of a moral compass. You know what's wrong, you know what's right. And yet the mere fact that there have been these structures built which represent normality, all of that means nothing unless we open our eyes and say, hang on a second, this isn't right.
Absolutely. And it is about identifying the barriers, and, like, I have been over the last 2 years chair of the Women in Sport Expert Group with the European Broadcasting Union as well, which is the umbrella body over all public service broadcasters in Europe. And we created a Women in Sport handbook, which is called Reimagining Sport is Equal. And, a huge part of that is, like you say, Sonia, just identifying the barriers and identifying what broadcasters have done to break those down, because they aren't immediately apparent, and, I suppose people are reluctant to change, and you continue on the way you've always been because you feel, well, we're successful because of that, and you can continue down that road. And actually trying to implement and put change in there in people's perspective and the way that things are done. Like, there's fear, and there's a risk in it because you're just afraid that you're going to change things so much that success isn't going to continue. So by gathering together data across the world, in the area of sport, is really critical. And there is a Women's Sport Foundation in the UK and one in the US and in Australia where they do have a lot of data which supports the promotion and the success of women's sport as well. And I think that's what we were trying to do in the handbook, was to give people, like, best practice in trying to change, in small ways, how you do things. And by identifying those barriers, you can actually start to implement a change in the way that you design sport, I suppose, and the way then, because we have such an enormous responsibility, in changing stereotypes, because the way we present the world in public, in media, is how people see it. And so it is, like, really important for us to to interrogate everything that we do in order to be fairer in the way that we represent the world.
Going back to 2013, 14 into 15, as you were on your own evolution of thinking around sport and gender, what were the biggest barriers, just off the top of your head, and have they changed or become less of a barrier? Or is the rock you're pushing up the hill, is it maybe a flatter hill now? Are you finding more awareness in general, and how has it changed?
There's historic inequalities in sport, that's across the board, and that is in terms of all stakeholders in sport. So like in terms of sponsorship, media coverage, federations, and the public, all of us have a way to go. I grew up supporting the men's football team in Cork, and so did most people of my generation, and all stakeholders recognize the need to improve the situation and to create more equality there. So what we have now is more federations investing in grassroots, which would not have happened. I mean, the first soccer World Cup Women's World Cup was in 1991, whereas the Men's World Cup was in 1930. So you're talking about a big historic inequality there that has been there. So and also just around, sponsorship as well. What you have now is more interest from sponsors to get involved in women's sport and to support it. And you get far more sponsors now who are supporting men and women's teams rather than just one. And media recognizes now as well the need to appeal to a broader audience and to include more people and a wider coverage within its offering as well. So, I think the Women's World Cup back in 2019 was a massive game changer there. RTE covered every single match with the TG Cahir, and we had never covered any of it before. Even the EBU found that there was the hours viewed were up 950% versus 2015, and that was 5 times the live coverage that it got back then. So there is massive potential. Only 7% of the global $30 billion spent in sport is women's sport. So there's a huge opportunity for growth there, and I think every area is kind of recognizing that and trying to address it.
I was struck last night. I was watching the compelling Drive to Survive, the F1 doc on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it, the irony wasn't lost on me. It is as male as it comes, I wonder, are all people aren't equal in their reception to this conversation. I'm sure there must be a difference between different sports as well. Some must be much more readily open to this conversation than others.
Yeah, absolutely they are, Sonia. And what we do find is that, team sports in particular, and I suppose the most popular sports in television, unfortunately, are the ones which are, have a bigger male kind of bent in terms of investment and coverage as well, like soccer, for example, rugby likewise, and GAA in this country as well. So, that's versus swimming, hockey, a lot of the Olympic sports are much more equal in the investment put in at grassroots and in the presentation of them as well. When you've got a rowing meet, for example, you cover a men's race and a women's race completely equally. You did the same, when it comes to swimming and athletics. So it is more team sport across the board, and you get it in basketball in the US, and you get it, and in American football as well. There is an enormous divide there around the amount of money invested in it, and then the amount of, I suppose, coverage of it then as well. So there is a huge amount of work, particularly in team sports.
So I know change is a big part of the story of what you've done in RTE and beyond. We might take a little break and come back and hear a bit more about that. Clíona, you probably don't know this, but you inspired me so significantly with your story that you have defined my next line of study. I am going to go on and study transformational change when I'm finished the master's. Oh, a science and an art. What a weapon to be able to wield, to understand how to bring people with you on a change journey. What was that like to begin to understand that and then to implement it?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a fascinating area. Like I've been studying, I studied a diploma in strategy and innovation, which prompted me to move further into leadership and the area of stakeholders and influence, and studied like change management within that diploma. And like you, it really and I suppose having being involved in a change process over the last 2 years as well, I could retrospectively fit a lot of what I learned on the change management in leadership course. And now I have just signed up as well for another diploma in organizational behavior. In a similar to yourself, I just find that whole area of changing mindsets and behaviors really, really interesting. For me, I suppose, you keep learning and you keep realizing that, oh my God, if I only had known all of that when I was entering into that, and you retrospectively fit things. But I just think you can't stop learning and keep applying. And in terms of change management within organizations, it is the area of kind of soft influence and the critical importance of two-way communication. For me, that is a real eye-opener of, it is about empowering the team, and motivating the team to want to be a part of it, because, particularly in the area of women's sport, everybody sees the reasoning around it and everyone recognizes that this is really important and we should all, be presenting sport as equal. But then when you drill down into the detail of all of that, I mean, what can be created from change is a lot of fear, and insecurity that can come with that as well, if it's not dealt with in the right way. So what's really important is actual two-way communication and understanding from the team, what are the fears, what are the challenges, what can we put in place to support the team to be able to try and drive this forward. And it's really handing the responsibility, an awful lot of it, into the hands of the people who know how to make those changes, because they know their day-to-day job and the different aspects that need to be put into it. But there's huge organizational responsibility around the culture and creating that psychological safety for people to be able to put their hand up and say, I really don't have a clue here about what I can do, or, question it as well and really challenge it openly, because, you want people to be honest about how they feel about things, and role modeling is critically important around how people, present themselves, and, and leaders in particular, how they incentivize people and how they reward people and how aligned it is with what it is you're trying to do and change. So all of those things, and then the mechanisms around that as well, in terms of, HR. Sorry, my dog is barking there.
That's okay. Dogs and babies are allowed now. This is the new world order.
It's like, you've said enough. Stop, please.
So I was just saying, the psychology of change and management and the of transformational change and how to, inspire people to embrace change is one thing, but quotas is another thing. What's your opinion of quotas?
I'm 100% advocate of quotas.
Are you sure, Clíona?
100%. Yeah, and I've put an awful lot of thought into it, but I absolutely feel that, I think it's the World Economic Forum said that we're 100 years away from change at the current pace of change. So then, when you look at that and say, well, we can't accept that. So what can we do to try and accelerate change? And, the only way to do that is to set targets, to have a measurement system so that you know exactly where you stand. I mean, when we were doing our horse racing coverage, we were just guessing that, horse racing coverage, 33% of female jockeys or trainers, were in and around there. But actually, when we started to measure, we were closer to 7-8%. And, then we could work with the race courses and with Horse Racing Ireland to say, is there anything we can do together to try and make sure that maybe there's female-only races or whatever? And they engaged in that, and that helped to change how we were presenting our horse racing. So without having a measurement system, without setting targets to try and achieve something, then really you never know whether you're going forward or backwards. So I'm an absolute advocate. And I mean, Sarah Keane as well, who's the president of the Olympic Federation, she set, a target themselves of 30% for their board. And now only just yesterday, she's after pushing pushing over in Europe, the European Olympic Board, to go to 30%. Like, that makes an enormous change, as we know from all the data, that if you've got 30% of women on a board, then that'll make change in women's rights being represented. So like I'm 100% like that. We absolutely need to impose quotas wherever there has been a reluctance in change.
And I think it's really important to say that quotas are not the end game. They're the mechanism to get to a world where they're not required, right? Because I think people see them as a sort of an end in itself. It's absolutely not that.
No, and it can be construed as such a negative word that actually I don't use the word at all. I use the word targets, and it's the same thing really, because, it has been kind of like when people talk about it, it is kind of derogatory, like in a way, the way that it is defined. And, ultimately, we don't want to be there. We don't absolutely don't want to be anywhere where we need to, and I suppose this is the issue. And this is a big concern as well, that people have around it. It's like you're taking the power away from people's decision making when you're saying you need to achieve a certain amount. And then there is this side of it where, I don't want to be a quota on anybody's list, and I don't want to be part of something where I'm achieving a quota. And there is such negative connotations around the women that are put in because of that.
So, you start with awareness, and before you know it, that awareness becomes a vision for how things could be. And you're kind of carrying that now at the moment. If you had a magic wand, what would the future look like for you?
I think like it would be reimagining sport as equal, as is the title for the Women in Sport handbook that we've got for the EBU. And it's not just like sports media, which obviously I have a huge interest in, and in the area particularly of targets and measurement and the need to have them, but also in the area of participation. I'm the deputy chair of the Ranelagh Gaels GAA club in Dublin, and our aim is to have gender equity across the board with participation, coaches, and on management by 2023. And like one of the big areas, like we have a diversity and inclusion committee, and what we created last year from that was a training program called Ranelagh Rockets, and it's for children with additional needs, and it's absolutely superb. And it was the brainchild of Stuart Banks in the club, and it did involve a huge amount of work and a big fundraising effort to get it set up and running, but there's huge voluntary effort there, and there's a big waiting list now for children in the area to try and get into it. So it's like it is trying to identify, I suppose, all the barriers and blockages across the board, across all areas of where people might not feel a part of what you're doing. And so like I think that's what we really need to identify within sport is, and it's every individual, it is like we've got Sport Ireland have a Sport Ireland policy, and it's very well laid out there around the ambitions around making sport more inclusive, but it does come down to every individual and every individual club and organisation to identify what the barriers might be. Like, for example, we don't have any clubhouse and we don't have a pitch, and so we've only written just last week to the Dublin City Council to try and make sure that we can get pitches that have toilet facilities, because it is a real challenge for us. We've got over 400 girls, and everybody knows about the cliff that at teens it's a real challenge for children, girls going through puberty, and the need to have toilet facilities is crucial. So like we're hoping to hear back to be able to get a pitch with toilet facilities, and it is to like keep interrogating, I suppose, every part of what you're doing within sport to make sure that all of the barriers are broken down so that everyone can really be a part of it.
Well,
brilliant.
Now the main focus of this whole piece, why we're actually here, is so that I can ask this final question at the end, Clíona. So I'm glad you've held on for this long and endured Sonia and Brenton and their quiz, and they're actually well-researched questions.
Is Esther's question.
But actually it worked out well, because what I was going to ask you was about, you've got all these accomplishments, you've led away in Rio and the Olympics and all, you've got diplomas and masters and all this. But I was going to ask about your under-8 coaching, because there is that drop off when girls kind of go from puberty. And I think you've kind of addressed what I was going to ask, is that you're aware of it and you're cognizant of it. So that's what you're trying to do. And is role modeling also something that you do to try and show the girls, there's older teens who are still working at it? And
yeah, and we have a senior team, and and they're fantastic. And so they've come to our underage training sessions to meet with the girls. And we've also had some of the Dublin ladies football team come and show their silverware to the girls as well. And that's a huge motivating factor for them. And they can ask questions of them, and then to get them to watch the games. And like COVID has impacted over the last while, but once we can get back to matches, we're going to start to bring the girls now, because they're under 9s now at the moment, the girls that I'm coaching in Ranelagh Gales, and we're going to bring them to the All-Ireland finals hopefully next year as well. And so once they see that, and kind of it's to build up that sort of identification of, you know, this could be me, and that is really motivating for young girls.
And would you have like retention targets then as well? So for those girls,
Esther, one question.
Oh, sorry. And what I was thinking about
not
this.
Esther's questions, okay?
I thought it was Esther's 5 questions. Esther's got 10 to 12 questions, so she's going to ask them all. Yeah, well, like, would you have retention targets then, like with keeping those girls on now?
Yeah, like our aim is to keep growing the underage within Ranelagh Gales, and to keep trying to bring the girls forward. And we only just introduced camogie 2 years ago, and so like we're only the second year of having camogie as well as ladies football, you know, and you know, trying to make sure that we keep the girls across like one of the sports at least, but to have it there. And like there's a huge focus on fun and teamwork, and getting the girls to get to know each other, you know, because that's kind of, and then hoping to build that bond with them over the next couple of years. And like, you know, as they get a bit older, then it is about maybe a night away to play a team down in Wexford or whatever, to just keep building that bond. And it's really important, I think, but for boys and girls, to have that connection with children outside of their school environment, so they have another group of people if anything isn't working for them in another setting. So, and I think, you know, building on the bond is really, really important for us at this age group, and then just making all the skills as fun as possible, so they're picking it all up, but in a way that they don't even recognize that they're learning something.
I'm just struck by, just to wrap up, I'm struck by, as a sport Luddite, I'd never participated in sport, but I'm into fitness and health, and I was very excluded from sport as being a little boy of difference, and so I always had a bit of bias towards sport. But I'm really struck by, if you can tap into the passion of sport, the sky's the limit. You know, if you can get people to engage with that passion. I was at the GAA final 2 years ago, and I'd never experienced anything like it. And I was like, oh my God, I've been missing this for years. Like, and if you can get kids to tap into that passion, sport is really powerful, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And like you said at the very beginning, Brendan, you know, it is a microcosm of society, and there's so much opportunity to create that inclusive space within sport, and for all of us to carry that responsibility to try and create that, so that, like you say, particularly at a young age, like you learn the physical literacy skills at the age of 6 to about 8, 9, you know, it's really critical to ensure that every child, no matter what ability, that they feel a part of it and they get that joy out of it. Because they're like, I do think, you know, physical activity, it's a human right. And like, there is such a part of feeling something, you know, something bigger than yourself. And there's such enormous joy out of it that nobody should ever feel excluded from that. So I just think any one of us involved in sport has such a huge responsibility to make sure that it is a space for all there, you know. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Lena, you're an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Delighted to be here. Thanks a million for having me.
We hope you enjoyed our chat this week with the fabulous and formidable Clíona O'Leary.
And if you did, we'd love you to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, so you never miss an issue.
As always, for all the latest updates on Lennon Courtney at Dunnes Stores, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube.
Katie Laffin created and performed our theme music. Krushka Kotian worked hard behind the scenes, and Esther Moore Donoghue produced her double-barreled surname off.
Until next Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.